This video is sponsored by The Dailies. The Hunger Games is a movie franchise that really needs no introduction. The story of Panem, its oligarchy, the repressed districts, and the brutal gladiatorial battle royale ceremonies have infiltrated public imagination ever since the release of the first film in 2012. And really, out of all the teenage dystopian movies that came out back in the 2010s, this series is probably one of the few, if not the only bright spots of that volatile genre. This showed itself in the box office record, generating close to $3 billion for its first 4 entries, making it the 21st highest grossing film franchise of all time. And not only in the box office, but even in the commitment to how they approached filming, with the second film probably winning the award as the best in the series, utilizing IMAX film cameras for every scene that takes place in the arena. Something that the upcoming film surprisingly will repeat, sort of, when it was never actually scheduled for an IMAX release. But we'll get to that later on. Although the conclusion of the 4th Hunger Games movie, Mockingjay Part 2, pretty much wrapped up the storyline of the series, 2 years after its release, Lionsgate boss John Feltheimer speculated on producing more films alongside successors to Lionsgate's other big concluded film franchise, Twilight. Because, you know, everyone needs more Twilight movies, right? But at the time, he emphasized that new films wouldn't be made without the backing of the writer of the original Hunger Games books, Suzanne Collins. Luckily for Lionsgate, it turned out that Collins had a new book in the works after all. With Lionsgate announcing in June 2019 that they were working with her to adapt it to the big screen, later in April 2020, it was revealed that Michael Arndt, the screenwriter for the Catching Fire movie, had written a screenplay for the upcoming adaptation with Francis Lawrence, director of the 3 previous Hunger Game films, returning to the chair as well. A month later, the book version of the story, known as Hunger Games, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, released onto store shelves.
Hello, friends in the UK. I'm Suzanne Collins, and I'm so thrilled that the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is being published around the globe today. To kick things off, I wanted to share a passage from the new book with you. Keeper moved on to the second car and released the chain.
The ballad showcases Snow's early role in the Hunger Games and his rise to power. Like with the Mockingjay book, which was incredibly content-heavy, Lawrence mulled over splitting the ballad into 2 films for the adaptation, but ultimately decided it would be a single production with the longest runtime of the franchise, ultimately settling at 157 minutes, just shy of the 3-hour mark. Something probably motivated by the intense criticism he got for splitting Mockingjay and his own regrets surrounding that choice. In May 2022, the key castings started rolling in, with Tom Blythe brought on as Snow, and Rachel Ziegler announced as his Hunger Games protege, Lucy Gray Baird, a role she actually rejected initially out of a sense of homesickness, dreading having to film abroad, but eventually, after remembering how much of a star-striking franchise Hunger Games is, she changed her mind.
Let me tell you, because this is such an embarrassing story for me. I was offered it in January of last year after wanting it so badly. And then he told me that they were filming in Germany and in Poland. And I had just gotten to London and I wanted to disappear because I was so far away from home for the first time ever. And I was away from everybody that I knew and loved. And I said no. And I regretted it the second I said it. I had another project lined up that fell through that got pushed into 2023. And I just kind of put my name back into the mix.
In fact, the director had her specifically in mind for this role based on her performance in West Side Story.
Choosing Rachel, she was my first choice to play Lucy Gray. I had seen her in West Side Story. She's a very, very talented actor. I knew that she could sort of play all the different facets that we needed for Lucy Gray.
Ziegler actually fit this role quite well, as the character she was portraying would be quite different from the original film's protagonist, Katniss Everdeen. She was a performer and writes the song that you would hear Katniss sing later on.
Are you coming to the tree? Strange things did happen here.
There's also music as a big element in this movie, and Rachel has an amazing voice, which made the songs fantastic.
Filming would begin on July 11th, 2022 in Poland, with the arena of the Hunger Games being partially shot in the Centennial Hall. The crew completely transformed this hall to give it that dystopian feel to match the film, which caused a lot of locals, including the mayor, to take notice.
The production designer searched around the world and found a fantastic arena called Centennial Hall in Wrocław, Poland. And luckily, we were able to secure it for about 6 weeks. It was the very beginning of our schedule. We got to shoot there right away and put our games in. And they let us do a lot. We had to add a bunch of rubble, a bunch of dust, a bunch of dirt. We also did some digital augmentation to the walls. There's a big sequence early on with explosions that damages the structure.
This backdrop is only a piece of how this Hunger Games film will feel much different than its predecessors, with the other 4 entries being set up over 70 years into the future with more technology and a more refined Hunger Games than the world we find ourselves in for this film. With director Lawrence saying to Collider, just emotionally it has to feel different. Visually, of course, very different kind of arena. Same with this, visually, a very different kind of arena. What I love about this, and because it's rudimentary, is instead of fancy elevators and glass pods and all of this, they're basically walked in at gunpoint or dragged in if they can, and put on their spots. It's just a basic arena, but of course, these explosions have happened and there's rubble everywhere. Coming back to the director of photography role for this film was Joe Willems, who worked on the Catching Fire and the 2 Mockingjay films, and is pictured several times operating IMAX film cameras for Catching Fire. They use this taller aspect ratio for the film to portray all of the arena scenes to give it a larger sense of scale.
We decided to use the IMAX thematically for the arena. We decided, you know what, we're going to stay scope all the way up until the moment she goes into the arena. And then as she's going up that elevator, that screen will open up.
Similarly for this movie, IMAX has just reported that they will be releasing a version of the film in the IMAX theaters that will again utilize IMAX's exclusive aspect ratio. Now, unlike Catching Fire, they are using approved for IMAX digital cinema cameras, this time utilizing the Arri Alexa Mini LF camera for principal filming. Oddly enough, it's not out of the realm of possibilities that this film was not originally intended for IMAX screens, considering the theater screenings were promised to Dune 2 for this time period. After Dune 2 changed its release date to March 2024 due to the actors and writers' strike, IMAX had a hole to fill in their schedule and allowed both the Marvels and Hunger Games films to take up those IMAX spots. And you know, it's interesting bits of information like this that can get lost in a vast ocean of news when it comes to movies and production. And for us, keeping up with information like this is how we come up with our ideas for our videos. That's why our sponsors, The Dailies, is extremely helpful. The Dailies is Hollywood's fast-growing email newsletter that now reaches 15,000 entertainment industry professionals with a quick 5-minute newsletter about what's going on in the industry, giving you a quick snapshot of anything important and noteworthy. Which for us, when it goes down into that level of detail or just gives you quick little things that are happening, it's a great way to save for notes for later content or, you know, show off in a trivia game with your friends. The readers include producers, directors, actors, managers, agents, and top executives, and work at companies, you know, like Disney, Paramount, Netflix, Warner Brothers, you know, you name it. And the best part about this newsletter, it's completely free. You can click the link below in the description to sign up right now. It's that easy. Now, let's get back to talking about some IMAX cameras. What's fascinating with IMAX reporting that they would be able to show the expanded IMAX aspect ratio for this film is that they were not going to be IMAX originally, which means they would have had to already been filming in this expanded aspect ratio. Now, while there are specifically 2 IMAX aspect ratios, one is 1.43 to 1, which is only available at a few locations around the world. Think Oppenheimer in 70mm. But for the rest, IMAX expanded ratio generally is talking about 1.90 to 1. And it just happens that on most films, especially with a camera like the Alexa Mini LF, the production is already likely filming 1.90 to 1 as the default setting. And we could see that here when we dig into some of the behind the scenes footage. While it looks like they are filming at a wider format, outside of the frame guides you can see the extra footage being captured above and below. In fact, from this, you can also see that they are filming in 4.5K RAW, which according to the Arri chart can be in a few different settings. Arri RAW 4.5K, LF 2.39 to 1, or Arri RAW 4.5K LF32 Open Gate. And for some of these, it looks pretty clear that they are shooting in Open Gate, allowing them to go back and access all of that extra space on the footage for a surprise IMAX release. All right, let's get out of the nerdy camera side of this. Let's talk about the choreography. One thing that makes filming the arena scenes for the Hunger Games challenging, especially at the beginning, is to be able to get a sense of where everyone is. And you have all these story elements that need to be very apparent so the audiences don't get confused what the hell is going on. This required the director and his team to map out the initial sequences in the arena.
We spend a long time choreographing it. I work with my stunt coordinator, Scott Attia, very, very closely. And what typically we'll do is we'll take the sort of beats that are important for the story and we'll kind of map that all out. And then we'll draw diagrams of what we think the arena is going to look like and where we want tributes to be. And then we kind of send Scott off with a bunch of stunt people to start to choreograph.
And that's the challenge, trying to film 24 people at the same time, and that requires a lot of planning, something they challenge themselves with filming long takes that don't cut, meaning they need to make sure all the choreography for everyone else was mapped out with the camera movements at the same time.
One of the things that I also wanted to do was, for the most part, to have shots link up and last for long periods of time, and we're usually also very focused on Lucy Gray. He'll choreograph all of that, and we'll start to design the kind of camera moves around that. Once we lock in on all the story beats and what the fighting is all like and who's dying and where they end up and get the story right,
they then bring in the cinematographers to choreograph the camera movements, many times just utilizing iPhones.
We then bring the actors in, we train them in the sequence, almost like learning a dance. And then we bring our camera operator in and the cinematographer in, and we start to choreograph the camera moves. And this is all done on a stage, not even on set yet.
This was a process that would be repeated a lot through the production of this film that wrapped up with its principal filming on November 5th, 2022. With The Hunger Games now hitting theaters, critics have already been pretty split on whether or not this is a good film, with Rotten Tomato critics rating it in the 60s. I mean, if you care about that. You don't often see sequels like these perform well with audiences and critics, but from the production you can tell the commitment to getting this one right and making sure it's tonally different as much as possible than the original 4 films. And while this film didn't use the real IMAX cameras, we do have another video you can watch right here that lists out every film ever shot with an IMAX camera, with a couple of surprise films.